Hey guys, have you ever been to the clamp aisle at any of your home stores and wondered why is there 100 different options for clamps that you can buy? The reason is most clamps have a specific purpose. There are some general clamps, but every clamp kind of has a specific use case that's targeted. Now they can all be kind of adapted to work for most situations, but today I'm going to go through the clamps I commonly use in my shop and the ones I hardly ever use, and which ones, if you're getting started in a workshop, I think you should buy. If that sounds interesting, stick around. So I would venture to bet if you went to most any workshop or any DIY garage, if you're looking for a clamp, these are the clamps you're going to find just because they're available most everywhere and they're the most general use of clamps. Those are F-style clamps and spring clamps. Spring clamps are most commonly used to work with smaller material, sometimes delicate material that you can't use a bigger clamp on. And my most basic use for these is joining small bundles of wood together. If I need to laminate, let's say these three boards together in this pattern, which I wouldn't, that looks ugly. But if I needed to, this is the clamp I would reach for that. Or if I'm going to, let's say, put an edge banding on something small, I would use this spring clamp to glue that on. That way I don't end up with any pin nails or anything in the finish, especially if I'm using a nicer wood. I don't want to mar up that surface with the nail gun. Moving on, we have the F-style clamp, and it gets its name because it is in the shape of an F. Easy, right? The tricky part here is there's several different styles. This technically is a style of F-clamp, but they call it a bar clamp, and it's because it's fed by a single bar down the center. Not to be confused with this kind of bar clamp. We'll talk about that later. In these style of clamps, you got two main styles. You have a pistol grip trigger style that you just depress and it closes in a ratcheting style. And you have a quick adjust with a hand screw that you can use on this style. The pistol grip with the ratcheting action is very good for very quick holding applications, things where you need to get a clamp on something very quickly to avoid it falling over or falling apart, something like that. Whereas the main benefit of the screw style bar clamp, F clamp, is that you can, because of the threading on here, you can put a lot more pressure on whatever you're clamping. Now these specifically you got to be careful with. They're addictive. Any of you guys out there know that it's quite pleasant to crank it every once in a while. So if you do this too much, you're going to get addicted to that, and that's a problem. So try and keep your cranking down to 1 or 2 days a week. I think that would be healthy. So a good example for me for the way I a lot of times use these pistol style clamps is I do a lot of Adirondack furniture in the summertime, and some pieces I need to have standing up. And to keep them standing while I'm attaching everything together, I'll just use one of these clamps to get it kind of where I need it, and then I will tighten it down. Now it doesn't have to keep it square, it just needs to keep it from falling down so I can get the other piece kind of held up next to it. Building off of that, a situation like this, whether it's a dado or you're just doing a butt joint and screwing through the side, these F-style clamps make easy work of making sure that your piece doesn't move when you start putting your screws in, and will help you keep the two surfaces flat against each other so that they don't separate when you sink your screw in. Up next, we have these two guys. We have a pipe clamp and another bar clamp. These, for me, are generally what I've always reached for when I've done panel glue ups. They're mostly cheap enough that anybody can get them, and they're easy to use. There's very minimal learning curve. The benefit to the pipe clamp is you can buy one set of these clamps and you provide your own pipe, so you can get any length of pipe. So these can be customizable. This could be a 12-inch clamp, or you could take the pieces off and put it on a 10-foot clamp. It doesn't matter. One thing to note though, if you go with the 1/2-inch style, is as the longer you go, even with 3/4, the bar is going to introduce more flex as you do that, and it could make it harder to keep whatever you're clamping together in place. It's gonna provide moving force to it. These are easily enough adjustable by moving this foot in and out based off of where you need your max capacity to be. And mine's a little stuck right now. And then you can adjust your clamping pressure with the crank at the end. Again, watch your amount of cranks. Now this bar clamp here is one I bought from Harbor Freight. I've got 3 different sizes of these. 24, I'm sorry. I've got 2 different sizes of these. I've got 24 and 36. I use both of them very frequently and normally for cutting board glue ups. These, just like the pipe clamp, provide the same benefits. This is easily adjustable for whatever your max width you need is, or depth, and then you adjust this screw here at the front to get your clamping pressure. This one happens to be missing the crank rod, but I can use a screwdriver in its place and it works just fine. Hopefully this is helpful for somebody. If you're doing any cutting board or panel glue ups, don't do what I did and crank the bejesus out of those clamps. There is such a thing as too much clamping force. If you clamp it too much, you'll force the majority of the glue out of the joint. And this is much worse if you got a very good seam between your boards. If you squeeze most of that glue out and there's not enough glue in there, your bond will actually be weaker because you thought cranking it harder was giving you better adhesion. In reality, it was removing most of your glue force from those boards, so they're not bonded nearly as well as they could be. So this is called a screw clamp, and this is different from the others in that it has 2 points to apply pressure to the clamping jaws, but it also has a few other features that make it ideal for some specialty situations. First of all, it has a 6-inch jaw depth before you run into the screw here. That can allow you to get further in to your workpiece to apply pressure over a wider surface area. This can be handy if you're gluing together, let's say, a couple of pieces of plywood that are maybe 6 or 12 inches wide. You can put some of these around the whole outside, and then you can apply even pressure across the whole board instead of trying to find different things to weigh the board down. The other benefit to this is you can crank one of these or any combination of these to put the majority of your clamping pressure all the way out at the end of the jaws. This will allow you to put pressure in a very specific area on your workpiece, which can be very handy at times. Last on the list, we have these babies. These are called parallel clamps, and I would venture to say these are probably going to be the least common among most of the general population. I'm sure some woodworkers might have some of these, but these are a lot less common than most things. This set actually happens to be a handmade set out of maple, it looks like. These came from my father as a birthday gift last year or the year before. Thanks, Dad. And these have the same general purpose for me as the pipe clamp and the bar clamp, in that these are great for panel glue ups. These have one benefit that those don't, though. These go together relatively quickly. The non-adjustable side simply just slides underneath, and the round portion of the bracket, it's not a bracket, what is that? The round piece of the clamping body, I guess, that's a good word for it, will slip into one of the grooves here. Because you'll notice there's grooves on both sides and several sections of them, making this almost infinitely adjustable. After you've got that side in, we can go ahead and repeat on the other side, sliding this in as far as we'd like it to go to one of those notches and letting it rest. As we crank this down, because of the way these end pieces put the force directionally in, but have an angled piece up to the bottom and top, I know this is super scientific, it will actually pull your boards together as well as put downward force on the clamping surface. So depending on what you're gluing up, this can greatly reduce the number of edges that you've got to try and manually match up. Because no matter how well you mill up your material, there's always going to be a couple joints that don't want to set down. To add to that, if you're doing a glue up and your edges don't match up perfectly, you can use one of these F-style clamps and clamp those two edges together after you have them glued together, of course. After you've got them clamped together, you can clamp these edges down, and that will hold them flush with each other, which will greatly reduce your sanding time. So which clamps would I buy if I was a beginner? I'm probably going to start out with an F-clamp and probably the pistol grip ratcheting style. They're the easiest ones to get used to. They have more than their fair share of uses, and I think they're probably the best bet for anybody getting started. After you get one of those, I'm likely also going to recommend a pipe clamp, specifically if you're going to be doing woodworking. This is probably the best way, in my opinion, to do most panel glue ups because of the adjustability of these. You can buy just a couple clamps. Mine ended up being 5 feet each, and because they're adjustable along the whole length of the pipe, you can use this for small cutting boards, or you can use this for a tabletop or whatever you need. So this would be my clamp of choice to get started with glue ups, and likely you could continue to use this for your whole career as a woodworker and be perfectly happy with it. Thanks for sticking around to the end, everybody. I know I only went through a couple use cases for each of these, but there are literally a million possibilities for what you can use any of these clamps for, and it's up to your imagination to figure out what you can do with these. But for now, if you liked it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you like, and if you'll give me a little privacy now, I'm going to crank my pipe.